A Spurs shocker today. The young man who is the cornerstone of the team, the franchise player, a young man who has left his mark on the city and the NBA world, is out for the rest of the season. We are talking about Victor Wembanyama. I'm Steve Spriester, live in the heart of the KSAT 12 newsroom. And over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about fan reaction. We're going to talk to one of the Spurs. We're also going to talk to a doctor, perhaps most importantly, about what this means for the health of Victor Wembanyama and his health going forward. Again, this is just a 21-year-old young man who apparently has been diagnosed with what is called a deep vein thrombosis. As a matter of fact, I want to read you exactly what the Spurs released at about 11:45 this morning. Spurs injury update, 2/20/25. The San Antonio Spurs today announced that Victor Wembanyama has been diagnosed with deep vein thrombosis in his right shoulder. The condition discovered when Wembanyama returned to San Antonio following the All-Star game in San Francisco. Wembanyama is expected to miss the remainder of the 2024-2025 season. The team will provide updates as appropriate. As you can imagine, this is news that has certainly hit the NBA world hard and the city of San Antonio. It's also definitely reverberating in Austin, and that's where our Mary Rominger is right now, getting ready. We thought it was just a normal shoot-around getting ready for the Spurs to take on the Phoenix Suns tonight, Mary, but it turned out to be anything but. What was the reaction when this news was released right before shoot-around, is my understanding up there?
Yeah, we attended the Phoenix Suns shoot-around, Mark Mendez and I, sports photographer. We went back and waited for the Spurs to bring us out for their media period within their shoot-around. And that time period kept getting longer and longer and longer. And then it started to feel like some news was going to drop. And we certainly expected that news to be Victor Wembanyama would be sitting out tonight's game. The idea that he'd be out for the rest of the season was not even in the realm of possibilities in our minds at that time. But as you know, in this business, Steve, once news drops like that, you're not talking much. You're just getting to business, trying to get this information out to all of Spurs fans, as many people as possible, because like you said, this certainly shook up the NBA. Now, once the Spurs did allow the media in towards the end of their shoot-around period, that's when we spoke to Chris Paul, and Chris Paul was the perfect person to speak on behalf of the team of just how emotional this news was for everyone involved.
As a matter of fact, Mary, let's listen into that a bit of that Chris Paul sound right now.
I think for all of us, knowing how much he means to our team, but more so knowing how much he means to the game and how much he loves to play. So,
have you been able to talk to him since he found out about this? And so, what's kind of his outlook?
Yeah, but that's for us. You know what I mean? I talk about it all the time. He one of the best humans I ever met. You know, in this league for a long time. So, I think for us, we just more than anything, we probably just miss him being around.
Is there a concern? Obviously, for his health with this type of diagnosis?
We don't know, but so much. Like, we were here too, just like you guys. You know what I mean? So,
knowing how he is as a person, how do you expect him to kind of take this recovery process and handle this news?
I mean, Vic is 21. You know what I mean? So I know for me at that age, you can't imagine not playing and missing a game or anything like that. So I think he'll attack recovery as well as you possibly can.
You got a good idea there, just the shock that Chris Paul felt. And like he said, he found out just before it was released to the media, Mary. We were told yesterday that he was sick, under the weather, probably wouldn't be playing tonight. But we were also told he is in Austin, or was in Austin. Did you get that feel, too, that Wemby might have personally met with each of the players, or that he's in town?
No, simply because we didn't see him. We didn't see him come off of the team bus when they arrived in San Antonio yesterday, and we didn't see him today. Now, I'm not as plugged in as some other folks, so maybe they saw Victor Wembanyama lingering around, but I certainly haven't heard that he had a chance to speak with the team face-to-face. Of course, there's a game tonight. There's a lot more on the mind as far as preparations go than speaking with You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's
Yeah.
a lot going on right now, and yeah.
What's the mood there like? I mean, what was the mood when this happened? I mean, you saw some of the players during shoot-around. I understand Chris Paul's the only one who talked, but did they, I mean, what was the mood in the Moody Center as all this happened?
Well, surprisingly, I guess I didn't exactly know what to expect once we saw everyone on the court, because to us, this was brand new news. Chris Paul did say in that bite that we just listened to that they found out when we all found out, but he later went on to say that they talked about it this morning. So I think that the team had some time to process this information and potentially, like you said, Steve, hear from Victor himself and catch up with him and maybe feel some closure in knowing how the 21-year-old is doing himself. But when we came out to the court, energy was high, to be honest. It seemed like the team was focused, but also having fun out there. And though Chris Paul did address the media with a lot of empathy towards the situation, his energy before and after seemed very positive.
All right, Mary, obviously the concern right now is for Victor Wembanyama, the person, not Victor Wembanyama, the player. And we're going to talk to a doctor coming up a little bit later about what a deep vein thrombosis means. It's basically, in my understanding, a blood clot. And the concern is that that blood clot could dislodge and cause a stroke or could go to the brain and cause some damage there. So obviously it's something you have to be very cautious with. But before we talk about to that doctor, I want to talk about Victor Wembanyama, the player. I mean, this is a guy that was averaging 24 points, 11 rebounds, almost 4 assists, and more than a steal a game. If you're the Spurs, this cannot be one player filling that role. I mean, this is going to be felt profoundly on the court.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, this loss, as Chris Paul mentioned, Victor Wembanyama is irreplaceable. What he does on the court, you just can't replicate it regardless of what players you bring in. So, yeah, right now the Spurs are hurting at center. Victor Wembanyama is an incredible force, both offensively and defensively. He impacts the game in so many ways. And we know when the team traded for De'Aaron Fox before the trade deadline, they traded away Zach Collins. Charles Bassey is currently still recovering from a knee fracture, so as he takes time to rehab and get back to full health, and Wemby now out for the season, unavailable, the Spurs are very thin at the big position. Bismack Biyombo was recently signed to a 10-day contract, and tonight is when his contract expires. So you have to imagine the Spurs will not only be looking to re-sign Bismack, but maybe also keep him for the rest of the season. But another move might certainly have to be made. But I just really quickly want to say, Spreester, that this news makes you kind of look back. What indicators did we have before this happened? And on February 1st, Wembanyama was out against Miami with an undisclosed illness. And then you think back to some of the games that we saw Victor looking a lot more fatigued than you would think at this point in the NBA season. So it really, as you look at it with this perspective, it makes sense that something bigger was going on.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Mary, because that was my next question. There were indicators out there that perhaps everything wasn't A-OK with Wemby as we went through the season, especially the last few games. A lot of talk about fatigue, and like you said, he sat out some games. And so that's one of the things I want to ask the doctor too. Is this something that just comes on, or is it something that's prolonged? Like what are the indicators that this is going on? All right, Mary, I'm going to let you go for a second here. We're going to take a quick break. Thank you so much. Of course, we'll see Mary on at 5, 6, and 10 tonight on KSAT. Take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to KSAT's live stream coverage of Victor Wembanyama being out for the season with what is described as a deep vein thrombosis. What exactly does that mean? Well, to hopefully answer some of your questions out there and questions that I certainly have from University Health, we're joined by Dr. Anand Prasad. Doctor, thank you for joining us. First off, you're a cardiologist. You are not Victor Wembanyama's cardiologist, so I want to make sure that we point that out at the beginning. But talk about a deep vein thrombosis. I've heard it described as a blood clot. Is that kind of a simple way to put this?
Yeah, it absolutely is a blood clot. It's on the venous system, as the name implies. So it can be in the legs, it can be in the arms. Most commonly, we see deep venous thromboses in the leg vessels, and from there it can break off or migrate. And the fear always is that it can break off and go to the lungs and cause what's known as a pulmonary embolism. And a pulmonary embolism is something that can be life-threatening.
Do you have any indication? There are some people that say over recent weeks they've seen Victor maybe being more fatigued than he normally would be, that maybe he's taken some games off with illness. Is this something that comes on gradually, or is it something that comes on in more of a hurry than that?
Well, without speculating on his specific condition, DVTs can present in different ways. So you can have a deep venous thrombosis that happens to somebody who's been in the hospital for a long period of time, or is fighting cancer, or in pregnant women. But it can also happen in young people who maybe get an injury or otherwise not feeling well and maybe have a viral illness. We saw a lot of DVTs with COVID. So you can get a clot simply from that. And so it's really hard to say it's one way that it presents. It can present in a variety of different contexts.
Are there symptoms that are common to no matter how it presents?
Right. So some classic symptoms of a DVT are swelling, usually in one limb versus the other. So it could be one leg or one arm, pain or redness or discomfort or heaviness in the limb. Obviously, if it breaks off and goes to the lungs, patients get short of breath and their heart rate goes fast. But for the DVT, it's usually swelling or discomfort.
What is the treatment commonly for a deep vein thrombosis? I mean, is it medicine? It's not usually surgery, is it?
So the first line therapy is to get on blood thinners to help the body dissolve the blood clot. The second thing that can be done, depending on where the DVT is to go in and remove it with a procedure called a thrombectomy, where you actually suck out or remove the blood clot.
When you hear that he is out for the rest of the year, does that give you any indication what treatment they're going with?
So probably he'll be on blood thinners, and whether he gets a thrombectomy or not, it's unclear, but he'll be on blood thinners for an extended period of time. The important thing is going to be trying to figure out why this happened. There are cases in athletes when they overuse their arms that they can get injury to the veins, and that can increase the risk of a DVT. There's a name for it called Paget-Schroeder syndrome. You often see it with baseball players, classically, or weightlifters, less commonly with basketball, but it can be seen in competitive athletes.
What is the prognosis for something like that?
So sometimes after a course of blood thinners, patients do well and they don't have recurrence. Other times they may need to be on blood thinners for a longer period of time. And then the third aspect is there a mechanical cause? Is there compression of the vein by a rib or hypertrophy of muscles? And can any of that be treated to prevent the blood clot from recurring?
Yeah, obviously we're more concerned at this hour with Victor Wembanyama, the person, than Victor Wembanyama, the player. So going forward from here, the likelihood that he will recover and be able to play again, I know it's a lot of speculation on your part, but that's a lot of people are wondering, what does the future hold for this 21-year-old NBA superstar?
Right. I think the first phase is get the treatment started, so I'm sure he's on blood thinners, and then follow the clot to see when it's gone, and then begin a workup to try to figure out why it happened. Is there some obvious cause that can be reversed or treated to prevent it from happening again?
There was some speculation that he could be back as early as this summer, certainly ready for the next NBA season. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Again, it sort of depends on what they find, right? So if they find that it's just a mysterious clot, it happened, it got treated, it won't happen again, great, he's back, no big issues. If he has some reason to be forming these clots, then that may complicate matters and may need to be treated further on.
Talk again about just how serious this condition is when you talk about deep vein thrombosis.
Yeah, so people don't understand how important deep venous thrombosis is and how important the risk of pulmonary embolisms are. It is a universal risk for all of us if we take long car rides, long plane trips, people on cancer therapy, people who twist their knee and they're bedbound for a little bit or break their ankle, or women in pregnancy. It's a very common problem that's not appreciated. This is not the only celebrity out there who's had DVTs. You can look at the news in the past decade. There's dozens of well-known people who've had blood clots, and it's really not understood or appreciated by the public. And it's a very important public health issue of having deep venous thrombosis.
I mean, obviously we're talking about Victor Wembanyama, but if somebody's out there, let's go over the symptoms again. If somebody, thinks they may have DVT.
Yeah, so if you just went on a long car ride or plane trip and landed and now your leg is swollen, it's hurting, it's very important that you get checked out, generally with an ultrasound or a CT scan to figure out if you have a blood clot. If you're a cancer patient being treated and you get swelling in a limb, it's important to rule that out. If you've had a bad viral illness or COVID and you develop a blood swelling and you're worried about blood clot, it's important to get checked out. Car accident, same thing. You have any kind of trauma to a limb and have swelling, we got to think about a DVT.
Is this something that's common in just a guy that's 7'2" tall? I mean, is it something that could be as simple as that? That he's just so tall, it's putting. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. Is that something that could be the cause of this?
Height really doesn't play a role in it. He's not the first NBA player who's had a DVT. You can look through a Google search and find other NBA players and athletes who have had DVTs, and it's part of it. NBA players get injured. They get muscle sprains and joint issues and limb issues. So that puts them at risk for having DVTs. They also travel. They fly all the time to different games. And being on an airplane, particularly when you're a big person sitting in a small seat, there's always a chance to form a DVT. So we encourage everybody, not just athletes, to get up, move around when they're on an airplane, stretch the legs. There's exercises they can do while they're seated to prevent blood from just being static and not moving. Athletes have reasons to form blood clots. They're also repetitively using their arms and doing weightlifting and training. So potentially they could get injury to the venous system in the arms, and that may increase their chances of forming a blood clot.
Yeah, Chris Bosh, one of the NBA players that comes to mind. He used to play with the Miami.
Chris Bosh of the Heat was classically the example we use when we talk about an NBA player who developed a DVT as well. There's NASCAR race drivers who've had DVT. So this isn't just a illness related thing. It can be an athlete's problem as well.
Yeah, what do you hope people take from this conversation, Doctor, as they head forward, and maybe your reaction when you heard the news on Victor Wembanyama today?
Yeah, so I think people should have an awareness that they're all at risk for a deep venous thrombosis, understanding that if they do get swelling or discomfort in one leg and it's bigger than the other leg, they should think about a DVT. And that because it happened to Wemby, it can happen to anybody, and that the treatment really is making the diagnosis and getting on blood thinners as quickly as possible.
Now, I do want to point out, Chris Bosh, I don't think came back from his injury, did he?
He was, I think, at the tail end of his career when he had his DVT, so I don't know how much it factored into his decision not to continue to play.
Great. Dr. Anand Prasad, thank you so much for your time at University Health. I know we got you in a last-minute call, so I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today.
Anytime. Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, We're going to kind of take the pulse of the fans out there and what they say about this latest news with Victor Wembanyama.
Very sad day to be a San Antonio Spurs fan, but we wish him the speedy recovery and hope he recovers and he's good to go for next season.
Be the consensus. More people worried about Victor Wembanyama, the person, than Victor Wembanyama, the player. Ernie Zuniga joins me now. And before we talk here, Ernie, I want to show you, we have this going around the newsroom. Garrett Berger actually circulating this around for people to sign, and so we'll get that out.
One of a kind.
By the way, yeah, a one of a kind Ernie Zuniga autograph on there.
No, I was talking about the cards, Steve.
I thought that's what you were talking about. Oh, I didn't know. Okay, so you've kind of been taking the pulse of fans out there. What has the reaction been?
Well, you know, this happened right at lunchtime, and we got out of here really fast and didn't have to travel very far to find Spurs fans. In some cases, we walked in on a couple of guys who quite literally were talking about this and mentioned Chris Bosh, and we kind of politely interrupted their lunch just to say, hey, what do you think about this? And then another couple came in, male and a female. Neither had any idea of what had happened, and I was the unfortunate one that broke the news to them. So you can imagine, somebody brought up the point earlier. I talked to a fan who actually, his name is Elliott. He was named after Sean Elliott.
Wow.
Longtime, lifelong Spurs fan, and he reminded me, it's been a heavy season for the Spurs. When you think about Coach Pop and the stroke back in November, and all of this and how promising this season was looking. I know the Spurs were kind of on the outside looking in for a playoff spot. I mean, it's not like another, kick to the gut, if you will, for Spurs fans this year.
Yeah, and I think, yesterday we're talking about can they get into the play-in tournament. Today,
they've already had, on record, they've already had a better season this year than they did last year.
Yeah, and today we're just, what's the rest of the season going to hold? Are we looking for another number one pick? I mean, do they tank at this point? I mean, there are just a lot of people that are out there wondering what's going to happen.
Selfishly, too, you think about the odds makers had Victor Wembanyama as a Defensive Player of the Year to win multiple awards, but because you have to play 65 games in a season to be eligible for that, so this will end any eligibility. He would have likely won one or more defensive awards.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking back to some of the other major Spurs injuries that we've had. I obviously thought about Pop.
Sure.
And the stroke from earlier. But, I mean, Tim Duncan, the year they're defending their first NBA title, he has a knee injury. Right. He's out. David Robinson obviously gets injured. He's out. That's when Pop took over as head coach from Bob Hill. I mean, we've seen injuries before.
Kawhi
with Spurs.
Leonard,
Kawhi Leonard. Let's hope this isn't a Kawhi Leonard. But obviously we have seen injuries with Spurs franchise players before, but not like this. Not something that is as potentially serious as this when you talk about this DVT. And I'm saying that from talking to the doctor that we just talked to, and him saying there's a very real danger in this whole thing of, an embolism or stroke or something like that.
You brought up Chris Bosh during the interview, so I quickly went online to refresh my memory, because you're correct. Chris Bosh ultimately retired from all of this. If I remember correctly, he tried to come back. And this is a cautionary tale. This is not to say by any means Victor Wembanyama's career is done. But Chris Bosh tried to come back and ultimately had complications where, in one case, a clot went up into his lungs.
Yes.
And that's ultimately why he retired.
Which is the main fear in this whole thing.
Which is a huge fear. And an embolism, those happen very fast, obviously.
But we're also talking about a 21-year-old.
Exactly.
Very fit young man here who you would think is, able to come back from something like this. And the doctor was also interesting when he talked about the treatment is blood thinners.
Right.
I'm not sure you can play in the NBA if you're on blood thinners.
Essentially, it rules out, I was just reading, I'm no medical expert, but I was just reading up on this. So essentially, when you take blood thinners, it eliminates the ability to have contact sports.
Exactly.
So you don't want anybody boxing you out or anything like that, or fouling you. So obviously, that explains why he's not going to be able to play. But just a came out of left field this afternoon and really took a lot of Spurs by surprise.
Well, and then if he does have to undergo surgery, that's a whole different thing.
That's next level,
obviously this news breaking just before noon today. It's something that has certainly shaken up the KSAT 12 newsroom. I can tell you that, as well as the city of San Antonio, and like I said, the whole NBA world. Was there one thing in talking to fans that came across more than anything else for you?
I mean, I'm not exaggerating. There were literally a couple of guys we talked to who were kind of like getting choked up, like they had just found out minutes before when we got there, and just coming off of the All-Star break that Victor. I mean, he was. I think Larry even alluded to it. He was the talk of
Yeah.
the Bay Area, right, during All-Star Weekend. The sky was certainly the limit. You know, the awards could have been coming in the postseason, and I think just the fact that nobody saw this coming, right? And I think the reaction when people heard, oh, he's out for the Suns game tonight in Austin. Well, he'll play tomorrow or he'll play next week. And obviously that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, and I think there are also a lot of people that are thinking back to those people talking at the NBA All-Star game about what a great guy he is. He's not just a great player. Yeah. And I think it was one of them said, yeah, he goes to bed at 9 and reads a lot, so that's cool.
He brought a book to the All-Star game, right?
Yeah, so I mean, he is in so many ways. He's been adopted by the city. He's someone that people care about as a person, not just a player. So I think that's kind of what you were feeling when you were out there.
I think you got to believe too. You know, France is got to be shocked the people across the pond, if you will, and how beloved he is in Paris and France and everything. How they must be reacting to this. Obviously, it's a different time zone right now, but that's got to be tough for them as well.
Absolutely, and of course, this is something we're going to be covering throughout the day, on air and online at KSAT 12. That's going to do it for our live stream here from the KSAT 12 newsroom. For everybody joining us, thanks. We'll see you at 5 o'clock.